Hello everyone, welcome or welcome back. Today I'm going to cover the fifth session of the Complete Guide to Statistical Analysis for Thesis Writing. In the previous video, we checked the assumptions of the tests and only run the tests for our two examples, the health data set and the environmental data set. In this session, we will do the same, assumption checking and only run the test, but this time for the psychology example. Again, like I said in the previous video, the interpretation of the outputs will remain for the next episode for all three examples. So let's get started. For our psychology example, we decided to use a mediation model where research confidence acts as a mediator between impostor syndrome and GPA. And we also explored whether study hours could moderate part of this relationship. Before interpreting any results, we need to make sure that the assumptions of our models are satisfied. This is one of the most important steps in thesis writing because even a sophisticated model can produce misleading results if the assumptions are not met. Let's go through them one by one. The first one is missing data. We checked missing data before in the second session, I assume. So as the outliers, we decided to ignore missing data since the number was very small considering the sample size. And also outliers were kept because they were not the results of entry errors, measurement errors, or does not belong to the population being studied. So these values, as I said, are still plausible responses from real students. So we can keep them in the analysis. We also covered the correlation between variables before, and it showed that imposter syndrome is strongly negatively correlated with research confidence. Research confidence is positively associated with GPA, and imposter syndrome is weakly negatively associated with GPA. Again, I would say these relationships provide preliminary support for investigating a mediation model. Now let's run the actual model to verify other assumptions. As I said in the previous video, a common misunderstanding about linearity is that every predictor must individually form a perfect straight line with the outcome variable. But in reality, for regression analysis, we assess linearity using the residual plots. When we are going to examine the residuals versus fitted plot for normality, the points should be randomly scattered above and below zero with no obvious curve or systematic pattern. So run it. And as you can see here, it's satisfied reasonably. Another assumption is homoscedasticity. Homoscedasticity means the variability of residuals remain relatively constant across predicted values. We use fitted value versus the square root of standardized residuals plot to examine this. So run it. As you can see, the scale location plot shows points scattered fairly evenly across the graph. Although the smooth line has a slight slope, there is no strong funnel shape or major violation. So we can say that the assumption is met. Next, we will assess whether the residuals are approximately normally distributed. So to do that, we need to check histogram and QQ plot, and also the results of Shapiro-Wilk test. So the histogram appears reasonably bell-shaped, and also the QQ plot shows observations closely following the reference line. And finally, the Shapiro-Wilk test produces a p-value of 0.56, and because the p-value is greater than 0.05, we fail to reject the null hypothesis of normality. Together, these results show that the residuals are approximately normally distributed. So we can say that the assumption of normality is met. Then we check multicollinearity. We also examine the correlation between independent variables and the outcome. But now to double check, we use VIF value. You know what VIF is, right? I mentioned it in a previous video. In case you don't know, it's a short form for variance inflation factor. And if it's less than 5, it's acceptable. In our model, as you can see, it ranges from approximately 1.03 to 2.11. So, since all values are well below the threshold of 5, we can say that multicollinearity is not the concern. And finally, the last assumption checking for the mediation model is independence of errors. We use the Durbin-Watson statistic, and you see here it's approximately 1.92 with a non-significant p-value, right? Values near 2 indicate that residuals are independent. So the independence assumption is also satisfied. Now let's move on to the moderation model. We prepare our model by centering impostor syndrome and study hours and creating an interaction item. You see these icons, IS_C means imposter syndrome centering, or SH_C also means study hours centering. Centering reduces multicollinearity and also makes interpretation easier. Run the model first, and again we repeat the diagnostic checks for the moderation model too because we need it. As you can see the results here, the VIF values range from approximately 1.04 to 2.13, which again indicates that there is no multicollinearity. And you see this plot, residuals versus fitted, shows nothing is out of order. And this one for checking homoscedasticity, it shows that there is no obvious funnel patterns and the residuals were scattered randomly around 0. The next one, the QQ plot, also shows that residuals follow a normal distribution. The Shapiro-Wilk test also produced a p-value of 0.873, which gives us further evidence that the residuals are normally distributed. So now that all the assumptions are met, at this stage, we can briefly evaluate the overall performance of the moderation model. You see the results here. The model was statistically significant overall, with an F statistic of 16.77 and p-value less than 0.001. Again, if I want to shortly point out the results of the model, I would say the model explained approximately 33% of the variation in GPA. We avoid interpretation of individual predictors because that will be the focus of the next episode. At this point, all major assumptions for psychology analysis have been checked, and they all appear to be reasonably satisfied. This means we can confidently continue to interpreting the mediation and moderation results. In the next episode, we will finally answer the research question itself by interpreting the statistical outputs, understanding effect sizes, and discussing practical significance rather than relying only on p-values. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and introduce my channel to your friends, colleagues, and anyone that is dealing with statistical analysis so I can get motivated to produce more videos for you. I'll see you in the next one.